Okay. Might have a few folks join as we get underway here, but for those watching the recording, hopefully you'll gain some information about our current status. I am Bob Newsworthy, and I'm joined by Jason Sisk, and we are from the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Lab. This is an ongoing series of webinars that we've been providing on the state of single-pair Ethernet and time-sensitive networking and our testing services and related activities in the industry. Jason will be providing some of the updates here for our recent participation in the March plenary for the IEEE 802 group down in Atlanta. And I'll provide some updates on some TSN and related activities. But Jason, after we just cover the overview here with going through the plenary updates, a little bit about PlugFests and testing services, I got a webinar announcement I want to make folks aware of if you do have a chance to attend or look at the on-demand recording. And if we do have some questions, we'll certainly take them.
Yeah, I'll cover quite a little bit, but as you stated, we'll start with the March plenary. The three main single pair Ethernet groups that are still taking place at the moment, 802.3 are CY, DG, and DA, all in varying different applications or use case environments, mostly figured on automotive and industrial technologies. The fastest one is CY and the most experienced at the moment, 25 gig base T1. There wasn't a whole lot of, I would say, commotion in this group. It was a pretty regular scheduled meeting, going through the comments that have been made on draft 3.1 in regards to editorial, and then some of the measurement methods, diagrams, and figures to make it more clear as they go into their final draft. With draft 3.2 hopefully wrapping up, 3.3 is usually the last step for these task force. And with that in mind, CY might be done mid this year. So it'll be a published 25 gig base T1 standard for everyone to look at and start looking at adoption. So interesting news. DG, I guess in reality I could have swapped DA and DG for actual order of things, but in the grand scheme, DG is a slightly different group in terms of it's a long reach 100 megabit extension of what T1L, 10 base T1L started in the 802.3 group. A lot of investigations were occurring in terms of actual setup and measurements, terminal blocks, looking at different SNR margins for different types of cabling and what could be actually possible for this standard. So it's still very early on in their task force. And the ideas of looking at what PAM technologies electrically work versus what type of lengths, be it 200 meters for the spur up to 500 meters for the trunk, are the kind of going rates at the moment. What, gauge cables, extensions of that, and eventually at the end, and some of the ad hoc meetings, they started getting into the encoding and some of the FEC, which is interesting. So we shall see how that gets drawn out. But I feel like that might be one of the first cases of it being used in a 100 base link for SPE technologies. For DA, we have, again, a different type of environment. It is a multi-drop kind of bus scenario with extensions on what 10 base T1S already did. So enhanced multi-drop, that comes from the name there. And they're exploring, extending that reach up to 75 meters and up to 16 nodes from the traditional 25 and up to at least 8 nodes. However, that does come with a lot more with discussions, and I think they got to some breaking points of trying to not define every piece. And so they're going to remove part of the stubs and try to specify actually the TCI or trunk connector interface instead of the MDI at those node locations, which is interesting. There's a lot more at play there, I think, in terms of defining the channel, but they have begun and kind of narrowed out some of those objectives. So shall see what comes up in the ad hoc meetings between now and June meeting, but that is a general overview.
Great, thanks, Jason. And just a reminder, we're going to go through our quick updates here and then take some questions towards the end. So we'll just continue on that theme with our status for 10BASE-T1S. This is the current standard for the multi-drop 10 megabit technology. We had a Plug Fest back in December. We're organizing a Plug Fest for the week of June 26th. We do have some planning calls coming up, the next being April 12th at 10 a.m. Feel free to contact us for details. The scope of that is still being defined, but I would expect that we'll be doing much more PLCA interoperability testing. We'll have many more participants than the first Plug Fest, just due to timing. The December holidays was somewhat challenging for some, but June is better. We tentatively have 4 participants already confirmed, and we've only had 1 planning call last Friday. So I do expect this will be a larger event. We already offer half duplex MAC testing for 10BASE-T1S. Remember, this is a half duplex shared medium. That's the multi-drop aspect. But PLCA, PHY link coordination. No, I got that wrong. Someone's going to hear this and go, haha, you can't remember the acronym. But that's okay. PLCA is below the MAC and increases the efficiency of the half duplex usage through coordination with beacons, but it still runs with CSMA-CD running above it. So verifying that half duplex behavior is important, as well as the PCS verification and the PLCA state machine verification and the normal PMA testing and channel behaviors. The work that is going on in .3DA that Jason was just referring to is looking to extend that reach, extend the number of nodes, potentially allow for power to be on the line, just like your old phone system, POTS and such. But it is still intended that 10BASE-T1M interface that DA would be defining to still be interoperable with this 10BASE-T1S technology. So that as this is adopted, you would still have an integration and interoperability path. You wouldn't have to replace everything that's 10BASE-T1S with the new technology. So we do have services available. Feel free to contact us if those services are of interest, and as well, the Plug Fest, please engage with us so that you can participate or benefit or sponsor.
Just to say, PLCA is physical layer collision avoidance.
Collision avoidance. Yeah,
Yes.
I thought it was coordination. I'll get it right yet. Again, while there's the 100BASE-T1L in the works in the standards process, 10BASE-T1L is in existence. There are multiple solutions, product shipping. We've been working with the APL group to define compliance testing for the APL version of 10BASE-T1L. The main aspect here is the APL group is things like P&O, ODVA, OPC Foundation, FieldCom group. They've defined their own specification for power delivery for trunks and spurs. And we developed that certification test plan and testing fixtures and software to automate that testing. That's available. But we also can do semiconductor validation for the full silicon conformance. Some of that's available today, some of that's still in development. So feel free to contact us if T1L is of interest or the APL services. Again, for APL, we do have that software and the test fixtures available. So certainly open to questions and interest around that. There is potential for an EA Plug Fest. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but I think they're thinking now in the June timeframe.
I think so, yes.
So certainly reach out to the EA SPE committee, and we can try to update you on the next call. But since that'll be in June, it might be a little bit too short notice if folks are interested.
I think the next meeting is towards the end of the month, so we can help direct you if needed.
Yeah. And again, our software is available for folks to leverage here if that QR code is easier than jotting down the links. These slides and this recording will certainly be made available for folks looking at this offline, or hopefully you can find it on our website as well. I just want to mention, I made this same mention in the last update, but again, a lot of these single pair Ethernet efforts, whether it's through the Open Alliance, Ethernet Alliance, etc., there's a lot of focus on the new aspects that IEEE defines, but these PHYs still have to interact with the media access control layer or the MAC above the PHY. And there's a lot of service groups at the moment, Avenue, Open, APL, that just don't look at that. They look at maybe MII or equivalent interfaces, but they aren't looking at the actual Mac system interaction completely. So our services for the 30 years have been doing this. So certainly if you're looking for full validation of a port type, be it for TSN or SPE, Mac testing is one of those essential elements that should also be tested. So feel free to contact us and how we can help you in that area as well. This came up and I added this last time and repeated this time because there are implementations that we've seen that have some interoperability impacting deficiencies that would need to be addressed in order to fully interoperate that are otherwise slipping through some of the current programs, and working to improve those programs where we can, but that moves at this pace at test specification and committee ballots and such, which does take some time, but we would expect those improvements in the months ahead. Just a short update again on our 1000-base T1 services. As announced in January, we have a tool available through our collaboration with Microchip. So that's offering full testing for PCS and PHY control for the 1000-base T1 technology. We have joined the Agricultural Industry Electronics Foundation, AEF, and they have a strong interest in seeing the Type E version of 1000-base T1 be validated. Currently, Open Alliance addresses Type A, which is the 15-meter reach, and the Type B is the 40-meter reach 1000-T1 solution. Obviously, solutions need to exist in the marketplace, and there's been some slower paths there for some. But as there are some capabilities, there are some solutions, and there's certainly some parties interested in channel validation. We're already doing channel validation for Type B, and we're looking to help the Open Alliance and the AEF define an extended physical layer test plan, or the PMA test plan for this Type B space, and potentially host a plug fest to examine that later this year. I did have the pleasure of attending one of the joint meetings of JTC 16, I believe, and I can't recall all the working group members involved, but effectively the groups that represent AEF and ISO to help define those standards. As eventually we would expect, as with the Open Alliance, any of these test plans to become ISO standards like ISO 21111-6. Jason, do you want to update on the MGBase-T efforts?
Yeah, so MultiGBASE-T1 that encompasses the 2.5, 5, and 10 gig speeds of T1S, not T1S. Looked at that at the second bullet there on the second block. No, of T1. T1S is a long way from that. Ultimately, there is a lot at work here, and being some of the newer standards put forward, there are not as many test tools and compliance capability at the moment, but we're working and have PMA test capability. We're obviously working to try to see what we can build and design with semiconductor vendors and OEMs to meet the PCS and PHY control compliance testing requirement, as we did with Microchip. But we'll see what comes out of it. There's some efforts that we might be able to do as stepping stones, which I think will be interesting. Giving the test capability we had mentioned for PMA, we can always tap some of the line, I think, and observe what we're actually seeing between the link between two devices. So we'll look and observe and see what we find. But at the moment, having that known to the public, so is a good first step. Second block there is a partnership with Leone Cables. The actual test channels themselves are necessary and more complex as these speeds evolve. They will encompass, I guess, a broader reach in terms of engineering feats, but not, I guess, unknown in terms of what's been done for other technologies. It's just adapting it to this SPE reach and bandwidth. So UTP and STP channels for SPE from T1S up through multi-gig. We're working with Leone as a partner in the automotive industry to try and analyze those channels, and then of course encompass that within our testing capability and range there to provide more information to the industry as we test the devices and ECUs that are in that industry. The one big thing of note here, as seen with the TC15 group and Open Alliance and the TC16 group, which we'll mention later on, is there has been some expressed interest to have another multi-gig Slugfest in 2023. The options now include looking at a wider array of test channels, focus on more on interoperability, and then of course the EEE that's mentioned there. Start looking at the energy saving and asymmetric test cases for multi-gig. So there's an interesting test scope to be defined, but with interest from the OEMs and of course ability from the semiconductor vendors. We'll see what that Slugfest provides, and we'll be actively involved. So look forward to it.
That might be September, October, potentially even later. Just
yep.
There is some time, some more updates for folks to benefit from here. Yep. This is another slide I recycled from the last update, but again, just the reminder that MACsec is of keen interest, at least in the automotive space. This is the layer 2 security defined by 802.1. And again, the UNH-IOL has offered MACsec testing for 10 plus years, I believe. However, our tooling and our capabilities do need a little bit of updating, which is something we're working on to support the newer encryption. But as some of our customers have requested that we update and help verify their silicon, that's certainly an effort that we have ongoing. And I believe that complements the work in the relatively newly formed, late last year, TC17 group, although much of their focus is specifically on the multi-drop T1S spaces. And just on that same theme of expanding services, we do work for ECUs and switches, whether it's TC8 for the ECUs or TC11 for the semiconductor switch providers. So certainly if you have interests there, we've been doing 802.1 AS 2011 testing per the Avenue Automotive certification for quite some time. But certainly if there's a specific area of interest there, just let us know. And just briefly, I'll touch on the TSN updates here from the 802.1 space. There's been a long process in going through, I think it's now over a year old, draft 1.4 of the automotive TSN profile, 802.1 DG. That new draft is expected this summer. Part of the input that was received back in March was concerns from the AUTOSAR and the Japanese automotive group JASPAR around some of the direction that the group is moving, where announce messages would be required. Relatively small detail, but there's a strong expectation for AUTOSAR and similar automotive use cases to adopt the TSN profile. That's the desire, at least. So we want to make sure we're in alignment with what the groups actually see as a requirement and a need from their support. Part of the issue here just being the AS 2020 standard is what the 802.1 group needs to reference, and that standard requires the use of announce messages. So without amending the standard, they would be making a standard that violates their own standards, which creates a quandary. But given the industry input here, I suspect they'll rapidly find a way. Key announcement here for those who have the chance to read this, and if you don't catch it for the April 6th time, that's okay, because all the webinars are available on demand once you register. So if you follow the link in the middle here, there's a whole series of TSN webinars that are great for background and detailed discussion, more so than we can get into in these brief testing the limits updates. And the last point, there is finally movement to move forward and to try to create what would be known as 802.1 DU to define cut-through switching in the IEEE 802 space, specifically the bridging standards of 802.1. That effort has some challenges because of some conflicts between interfacing service layers between 802.1 and 802.3, the Ethernet groups. And the reality here is industrial automation, the 6802 efforts for TSN, those areas expect cut-through switching because those spaces have been using cut-through switching for a number of years, despite the lack of an 802 standard defining such things. So in order to, basically meet reality, the standard needs to come into existence, and we'll need to work through the interface challenges between the .1 and .3 groups should this DU effort be approved to go forward. And if it does hit a roadblock in the current processes, I would expect that roadblock to be worked through in some capacity so these standards can get defined. So we don't have what would effectively be the current status where there's product shipping that violate the 802 standards because they support cut-through switching. Some of this is a rehash on the Open Alliance, but again, there's that multi-gig plugfest potentially September, October from TC15. That also aligns with the ongoing work of the recently formed TC16 group for energy efficient Ethernet, which principally has that use case in, say, a camera setting for asymmetric EEE use with high data rate from the camera and low data rate to the camera. So that combined EEE and MGBase-T plugfest makes sense. UNH-IOLs, we've been testing that for a number of years in the regular base-T spaces. So testing this with EEE setting is certainly a fairly straightforward process with the right tools and observation. And we're working with that TC16 group to develop that test plan. And as mentioned, we are continuing to engage with groups such as TC17 to understand their adaptation of MACsec for T1S, and certainly looking for our tooling to help support the semiconductor needs in these spaces. A brief mention on our ongoing work with the Ethernet Alliance, a little bit outside of single pair Ethernet, but we are hosting an InfiniBand Trade Association and Ethernet Alliance plugfest the first half of May. And that is looking at 1500 gigabit per lane technologies. Our little single pair Ethernet is only at 25 gig. One day we might need that in the backplane, but hopefully not for a little bit. There is that ongoing effort for the SPE group within EA to organize a T1L SPOE plugfest. And that continued effort, I believe, has the next call at the end of the month.
I'm actually wrong. There is a meeting next Monday, April 10th. So every 2 weeks is usually the schedule, and I just skipped the calendar there. So
okay,
let it be known.
Every 2 weeks. So April 24th or next Monday. Feel free to engage with those folks as they move towards what could be a plugfest in June. Just a quick mention again that there is a world outside of IEEE 802, and timing, whether it's for time-sensitive network or position navigation and timing, such as GNSS, the GPS or such system, is important. And we're being supported by the Department of Homeland Security to help develop, with the support of the IEEE Conformity Assessment Program, or ICAP, what would eventually be a certification program for devices that meet this emerging standard, P1952. That effort is going to take some time as the standard is continuing to be worked on for the first draft, but feel free to engage with those groups as your interests align there. We'll hopefully be supporting through this involvement. We are hosting the North American ORAN Plugfest this spring. This is, I think, our third since joining last year, and certainly encourage those who have a telecom timing interest. And there's telecom profiles for TSN, of course. Some of that can get exercised through these proof of concepts or POC fests or plug fests, depending on one's term. So that's the quick updates we have here. The upcoming tidbit that I might be able to announce in June may be some work to address White Rabbit, which is a sub-nanosecond 1588 profile in a form. And that we'll have news on in June. And again, if there's any feedback from any, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is here. If you've got specific questions about our services, about what's going on in industry, if you've got questions of a more technical nature, whether you wish to contact us privately or attend our next update, typically this would be a few weeks after the next meeting of 802, which I believe is in Berlin in May. So this would be early June that we would likely have another one of these webinars. So feel free to reach out to us. But while our attendance is a little bit low this call, certainly if there's any questions from folks here, feel free to either type it into chat. I think we can unmute folks if you want to just speak your question. And if there are no questions, then certainly we don't need to keep you for too long. But you should either have the ability to chat a question or unmute and ask a question if you so wish.
Clarify too, Bob. The next IEEE meeting is in IEEE meeting is in May in San Antonio, and then the July one is Berlin. But
July is Berlin. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yep. San Antonio.
always a lot to keep track of.
So again, I hope whether you're watching this online on demand or you're here, you're finding some benefit in the updates. Feel free to review our YouTube channel for past testing the limits updates, or just feel free to reach out to us with any particular questions you might have. Again, we're always looking for your input on what we might be able to address in more detail in these short webinars. So again, feel free to share your thoughts, ask your questions, or certainly catch us in June. Okay. Well, I appreciate your folks' time who were available today, and those reviewing this on demand. Take a look at those TSN webinars, look at our other past updates, and please feel free to reach out to us so that we can best align our plans with your needs. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.